pre-rapture events that have not yet taken place. And these, let me just say that about prophecy. People are always saying, well, the rapture, it hadn't happened yet. But do we realize that the prophets of old, Israel, Ezekiel, Daniel, all of those prophets, they prophesied things that I'm sure the people in their day were very skeptical.
Yes.
They didn't believe either. But those prophecies came and are still coming to pass.
They are.
A lot of people talk about rapture, what's taken place, what hasn't taken place, and I know a lot of people are actually believing that the rapture could happen any moment now. So what do you say about that?
Most preachers, I would say most, probably correctly, would talking about the rapture would say there are, and I heard it last week on TBN, there are no events left to take place before, scriptural events to take place before the rapture. But I think we need some enlargement into that theme, because there is one very, very important prophecy that is throughout the major and minor prophets of the Old Testament. One event, very important event, that's going to take place before the rapture. We know with the events taking place in the world and in America and with the election, the things that are going on, Jesus is coming soon. But we need to understand scripturally that there is one very important event prophetically that has not taken place yet. Shall say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. This is the Russian, German, Iranian coalition that will come against Israel. I'm going to go against the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. So when this Russian, German, Iranian, Arabic coalition comes against Israel, it says there will be no walls protecting the Jewish people. In Israel, I've traveled in Israel, Brother Mike, we've been over there preaching and working together.
Oh, yeah.
There are well over 700 kilometers of walls dividing the Palestinians and the Jews in Israel. And when Russia comes against Israel, it says there won't be any walls. It's not going to take place right now because those walls are still there. Something has to happen to cause those walls to be brought down, to be destroyed, before the Russian armies come against Israel in Ezekiel 38 and 39. The walls are going to come down. Why are the walls going to come down? Well, there's a prophecy in Psalm, the 83rd chapter, by Asaph, who was a prophet, not just a musician, who prophesied about a war that would take place just before the tribulation period. And this whole chapter, the whole book of Obadiah, is dealing with this war that will take place just prior to the rapture. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Joel, there are many passages in the prophets, major and minor, that deal with this war that will take place before the tribulation period than scriptures that deal with the battle of Armageddon at the end of the 7 years.
Wow.
Obadiah says, for the day of the Lord upon all nations is near. Look at that word, is near. The day of the Lord is the 7-year tribulation period. And he says, the day of the Lord upon all nations is near. It's about to take place. And we see whenever Jesus was born, remember Herod sent soldiers to Bethlehem and they killed all the babies. Those weren't Jewish soldiers killing the babies. Those were Edomite soldiers killing those Jewish babies because Herod, who was an Edomite, was trying to stop the king of the Jews from being born. And then later on, another Herod kills John the Baptist. Later on, another Herod beheads James, the brother of John, one of the apostles. So we see this problem with the Edomites for over 2,500 years has existed, and we see the things that are taking place in the Middle East right now. This same thing has been going on for over 2,500 years. It's nothing new. And the Arabs living in the West Bank, they are the remnants of the Edomites that came into Israel after the Babylonians had captured the land. Obadiah says, the whole book is referring to the battle that takes place between Israel and its neighbors just before the tribulation period begins.
Okay.
So that's why Obadiah says, for the day of the Lord upon all nations, it's near, it's about to take place. And you Edomites and you Arabs that have killed the Jews, as you have done to them, it shall be done to you. Your reprisal shall return upon your own head. And God is saying, just before the tribulation period, I'm going to judge them because they of the old hatred. They have not let the hatred go. They hate the Jews. God bless the Jews. Isaac was chosen, not Ishmael. Jacob was chosen, not Esau. And so the hatred has brewed for thousands of years. And God's saying, just before the tribulation period begins, I'm going to pay you back for 2,500 years of killing my people. It says, Hezekiah the king and the princes commanded the Levites to sing praise unto the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. A seer is someone who, that's an old word, I know, but a seer is someone who sees into the future, who prophesies what he sees, a vision, a dream, or something God has spoken prophetically. So it says here that Asaph was a seer. Asaph was not just a musician and singer, he was a prophet. Now, I want to go to his prophecy, one of his prophecies he gave in Psalm, the 83rd chapter, 83rd division of Psalms. Now, this whole chapter was written by Asaph. We don't have time to look at all of it. You could go back on your own time and look at the entire chapter. But let's begin with the 3rd verse to expedite time. Asaph, he's talking about what's going to happen just before the tribulation period. There is going to be a secret coalition among Arab nations, and they are secretly going to plan and carry out an attack against Israel that will take place just before the tribulation period begins. And actually, this is the event that puts everything into motion to begin what will eventually end up with 7 years of war and tribulation period. And then the 6th verse, Ishmael begins to give the nations that will be involved in this secret treaty, this secret coalition. This is not the treaty that the Antichrist makes at the beginning of the tribulation period. This is a secret treaty that is made before the tribulation period.
And the United States will not be involved in this.
Absolutely will not be. Of Edom, see, why is Edom first? Because they lead the coalition, it's their plan. And the Ishmaelites of Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Assur also is joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. Okay, so he gives the names of the nations that will form this secret coalition. You can't hide anything from God. I mean, over 2,500 years ago, God gives the names of the nations that are going to form this coalition to attack Israel when the day of the Lord is near, and God is going to use their attack against Israel. See, once again, it's not Israel attacking them.
Right.
They are going to attack Israel. And God says, I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it. I have given them a chance after chance after chance to restore the relationship with their brother and to have peace, and they just try to kill the Jews.
You know, that makes me think of that of the scripture where in John 17, I call that the Lord's Prayer, because that's where Jesus is praying right before he goes into the garden.
Yes.
It wasn't Matthew 11 and Luke 16, but he's praying there, and here's what he says. He says, righteous Father. He says, righteous Father, because I believe wholeheartedly, by the time all of this is said and wrapped up, there will not a person on the face of the earth be able to say that God has not been a righteous judge, giving us more than ample opportunity to repent.
If we all got what we deserved, we would all be sent to hell.
You know
we
what?
would have all been judged a long time
That's
ago.
right. And you know, I told him the other day that God's not fair. You know, we're always like, this is not fair. Well, God's not fair. If he was fair, we would be zapped out of here.
That's right. So the first verse of Isaiah 17 says, the burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Listen to those two words, a ruinous heap, like a trash. There won't be anything left. Underline, if you've got a Bible, underline that phrase, Damascus is going to be a ruinous heap. Now, Damascus...
Yes, what is Damascus today?
Well, it's the capital of Syria.
Yeah.
And it's a large city, but for over 5,000 years, Brother Mike, Damascus has never been destroyed. It's been conquered by everybody. Even Napoleon, I guess, was there. It has been conquered again and again and again. But for 5,000 years, Damascus has never once been destroyed. So this prophecy cannot be something that's dealing with the past, something that took place 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, because Isaiah said, or 2,500 years ago, because Damascus has never been destroyed. In 5,000 years, Damascus has never been destroyed. And the last verse of that 17th chapter says, and at evening time trouble for Israel. There will be trouble for Israel. The secret confederacy will attack Israel at night, and Isaiah says, before morning, he, meaning Damascus, Damascus will not exist by the next morning. So during the night, during the evening, this confederacy launches a massive attack against Israel with chemical, biological weapons, and Israel initiates the Samson option, and by the next morning, Damascus is gone. The heart is trying to get clarification of something that Golda Meir had said. She was the Prime Minister of Israel. He says, now you're saying, Ms. Meir, Prime Minister, if ever Israel was in danger of being defeated on the battlefield, it would be prepared to take the region and even the whole world down with it. And Golda Meir says, yes, this is a quote, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. You see, the Jews have nuclear weapons, and they have had them for several years.
Sure.
And so Hart was accusing her, well, you're talking about, if Israel was about to be annihilated, like Hitler had the plan, and like a lot of Arabs would like, not all, but many Arabs would like to see Israel destroyed. And so if Israel was about to be annihilated, you're saying you're willing to use your nuclear war weapons to destroy the nations around Israel, even if it brings the whole world into a nuclear conflict. And she said, yes, that's it. You understand, that is exactly what I'm saying. Well, that's what's going to happen. Israel's going to be attacked, and it's apparently going to be weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological weapons that are going to be used against Israel, and Israel will retaliate with nuclear weapons against the inner circle of nations around Israel. And just like Hart predicted, he said, and even if it ends up the whole world going to nuclear war, and she says, yes, we will. If we see we are about to be annihilated, we know that the Arabs are not going to have any mercy on us. They're going to kill our women, they're going to kill our children, they're going to slaughter us just like Hitler, the Germans did. And so we will, yes, use our nuclear weapons that we can survive. Okay? So after this war, after this nuclear conflagration, then the tribulation period begins, and it will be filled with nuclear war. Okay, so but it begins with this pre-tribulation war when the Edomites organize a secret coalition against the Jews. They launch the attack at night, and by the next morning, Israel's neighbors will not exist. What is the next thing that we see in the world that directly points to the second coming of Jesus, the rapture? Let me speak close. Let me speak directly. First, the next thing now there might be a lot of things between now and then. We've got this COVID going on. I believe there's going to be terrible tsunamis hit the east and west coast of the United States. A vast amount of people are going to die. A lot of this evil that has swept our nation has come from the coast, especially from New York in the northeast, especially from California, Oregon, and Washington in the west. Even the judgment of this COVID, even this judgment, on the first day, New York City was the first place where abortion was legalized. And on the same date, that the first abortion was legalized in New York, it is the exact same day, many years later, I think that was 73 maybe, when abortion was legalized, or 71 in New York City. But on that same day that abortion was legalized, in 2020, the first case of COVID was registered in New York City on the exact same day. The second city, Brother Mike, do you know the second city in the United States to legalize abortion? Seattle, Washington. First case of COVID discovered that was reported in Seattle, Washington is the exact date of the day that Seattle, Washington legalized abortion. You tell me that COVID is not a judgment, that God is removing his hands of protection and saying, wake up Seattle, wake up New York, wake up America, stop killing your babies. Every baby you kill is an image of the living God. And do you know the date they want to have everybody vaccinated, that they can take control of the world, is 2030. If this war I'm talking about takes place in 2026, 3.5 years later, it would be the midpoint of the tribulation when the Antichrist breaks his peace treaty with Israel. And that is the date that Bill Gates and George Soros, they have set to take over the economies of the world, is in 2030. Midpoint of the tribulation, when the Antichrist breaks his peace treaty with Israel and attacks Israel. So what we're going to see next, though, that we can directly attribute scripturally to the rapture, civil war in Egypt. When the Edomites recognize, hey, the Muslim Brotherhood has taken over Egypt, they send out a secret ambassador to the nations around Israel. They attack Israel. Israel responds, counterattacks. It initiates the Samson option, destroys these nations, occupies these nations. Israel becomes a superpower in the Middle East, tears down the walls because they won't need them anymore. And then after the walls are torn down or partially torn down, Russia and its allies attack Israel. They are destroyed. 3.5 years later, the Antichrist, they make that peace treaty with Israel, but they immediately break, the Russians come against Israel, and there's a major nuclear war. Hundreds of millions of people will die, including Americans. And then the midpoint of the tribulation, the Antichrist breaks the peace treaty. My guess would be around early 2030. And in 2033, it takes us to 2,000 years since Jesus died. 6,000 years, 2033, 6,000 years since God, according to the Jewish calendar, created the world. But 7 years before 2033, we've got 2026, 7 years before the tribulation period. I'm giving you a scenario. Don't go away and say, Philip said, God said on such. No. But I'm giving you a very, very likely scenario, because God is a God of organization. God is a God of mathematics. He doesn't haphazardly do anything. He has a plan. And he knew the beginning. He knew the end from the beginning. Folks, whatever the date is, we're getting close. And the things that are happening now, it should cause us to fall on our knees and make sure our hearts are right before Jesus Christ.